Yeah, welcome back. We'll have 45 minutes for the discussion. I'll take 5 questions and then to the panel to respond, and then we will take more 5 questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation and on a very important subject. There are 2 points here. Generally, as Lutz said, there's very little information about the Khartoum process, which is available to the public, the general public. But I happened to attend a session that was held in Chatham House. I think it was about this subject. As far as the information goes, one of the aims of the Khartoum process is also combating terrorism. It wasn't mentioned in your presentations here. It's not only controlling migration. It is also, I don't know if this is part of, is understood as part of this problem of migration, or it is a separate thing. But I seem to understand it was a separate thing. Anyway, the other point is that, one explanation or a plausible explanation for the attitude of the EU in concluding the agreement itself and its implementation. You have noticed that it was done on a bureaucratic, non-political level. I think one explanation is that, as which can be compared to the American position now. There is the fact that the government in place in Khartoum, it has been there for a long time. It seems that it's going to be, there's no indication that it's going to go away anytime soon. The opposition is very weak. And these governments in the West have very real concerns about the problem of migration, especially last year with the problems of the Syrians and this huge wave of migration. So they had to look after their own interests when there is no position, there is no, it doesn't look like there is any hope that they will be able to have a different kind of government or an opposition which is strong enough to constitute, an alternative for the government. I think this is one of the explanations for the way the agreement has been reached and the way it is being implemented. Thank you very
much. Thank you so much, Lutz and Mohamed, for this presentation, which is found it very, very informative, and also when you mentioned the underlying, the flaws on the underlying assumption of this project. And the European looking, the EU mainly focus on their own interest, because there is 2 different issues, my understanding from this presentation. On one hand, is controlling the flow of people from Africa toward Europe. And on the other hand, serious concern about the protection of these very people in that area. This is the conflict which we can see, and which you Lutz undercover some of them, which is the assumption and how you're going to do it, how you're going to protect the human rights, and in the meantime, you can control them from moving around. I'm just wondering, because Lutz mentioned there is issue, there is a model called Moroccan process, and I'm just wondering, is that something they implemented in Sudan or is it different? And what's the advantage or the difference between these 2 processes, generally speaking? And also, Mohamed mentioned some of the implementation of this project in Sudan. And my understanding, because it's ministerial and it's governmental process from the very beginning, third parties or third sector is not involved. And then I'm just wondering how this process now, in terms of number of refugees, how they assess them. Is there any statistic about the people being granted stay in Sudan, and what's the protection they have why they maintain them. If we can compare, I know that we cannot compare them with Europe, but generally speaking, is there any proper protection in terms of there is welfare and there is right in Sudan, and just any information about the law implemented regarding this topic? And thank you so much for this presentation.
So I would suggest we take just 3 questions. I will take one more, because you guys put a lot of details on your questions.
Thank you. My question is that where does the Khartoum process stand, considering the international law and Geneva Convention and other conventions for protection of children, UN conventions to protect children, women, displaced people, along with the human rights legislations internationally, Red Cross as well. They've got some legislations they are work based on. So where does this project or process start with regard to this, and how it could be challenged? It is the best way to be legally challenged in courts. Thank you.
We'll start.
Okay. Let me answer Sawi's question related to that you mentioned that the process is actually mainly based on the interest of the European countries and also Sudan. And I think this is a very valid argument in terms of that mainly international relations actually statistics based on governments actually strike deals in order to keep their own interest. Especially regarding the issue of combating migration, it is actually a key issue related to European discourse with regard to control of migration. If you look at France, UK, Germany, Netherlands, so it's actually one of the main issues. So I think the policy of control of migration is actually derived from home, from the European countries' interest. Terrorism is actually mentioned as part of the Khartoum process, but it was actually mentioned in a very shy manner. It was actually mentioned as part of a package that part of the fighting against irregular migration and human trafficking. It is also similar to the issue of terrorism, because human trafficking is actually regarded as a transnational crime and actually part of the package of that need to be fought by the international community. And actually, just to mention that, interestingly, now those who are actually tried in Sudan, especially in East Sudan, for the commission of human trafficking, are actually tried under the Terrorism Act through the special courts. And actually, this is also raised issues related to fair trial guarantees, which means actually you have, if you are under the process of being accused of committing human trafficking, then you will be brought under the special procedure. And actually this is under the special rules of procedure, under the 2001 Act of Anti-Terrorism. And this is, for example, restricts the accused to have the right for appeal, a death sentence. Now there are some cases related to death sentence imposed against some traffickers who are actually don't have the right to go to the higher court. They only have the right to go to the appellate court rather than the high court. So terrorism, human trafficking regarded as part of a transnational crime and falls as in the same category. What is the difference between Morocco process and Khartoum process? I think there is key difference. Morocco process is actually provided for legal migration, which is actually one of the positive aspects. Khartoum process does not allow for any possibility for any legal migration.
But not yet, they say at the later stage.
At the later stage, yeah.
So what's illegal?
Yeah.
What's legal and what's not legal?
It is
What's
actually
the definition of legal process and illegal process?
that you can have certain quotas to go to any European country through the legal routes of migration rather than irregular migration. So this is mentioned as part of the Morocco process. The issue of where does the Khartoum process stand? I think this is a very good question related to there is a lot of discussion and scholarly debate about the extraterritorial approach adopted by European countries, and actually, especially with regard to control of migration, which is the border management and forced return of migrants from Europe to the Horn of Africa and other countries, violates the principles of rule formal, which is a key principle under international the Refugee Convention 1951. And there is a very you mentioned litigation. Now there is a case the European Court for Human Rights in August, where 50 Sudanese migrants were actually returned back to Sudan by the Italian authorities under a special agreement concluded by Sudan and Italy last year. And actually under this agreement, there is a lot of flaws. For example, the screening process, the interview of those who apply for asylum, and the guarantees for appeal, all these are actually violated in the process. Some of those who actually applied for asylum, they returned back to Sudan. Some of them now, they actually submitted their cases and petitions in the European Court for Human Rights. And this is actually one of the main strategies used by lawyers, human rights lawyers, in order to combat, in order to actually fight the issue of forced return of migrants to their own countries. Do you have any Lutz?
Yeah, on the last question, I think it's actually quite a difficult one, because obviously all the various countries, they have their own human rights obligations depending on which treaties they are party to, and the EU also has its obligations under the EU treaties. But the problem is this at the policy level. So in a sense, you have to ask, well, what are the actual violations? I mean, that the actual declaration pays lip service. They say, recalling that promotion and respect of human rights constitute a cross-cutting issue of our cooperation. But I think the proof of that is actually in the implementation. So you would need to then look at specific action undertaken pursuant to the process. So then it becomes interesting. Say, if you provide equipment to a country such as Sudan, and that is used in specific violations of human rights, are you then also liable as the one providing that equipment? What are the implications of that? And of course, you can always challenge whatever country such as Sudan is doing under the Khartoum process. I mean, theoretically in Sudan itself, and I guess up to a point you can, in in the course of proceedings Constitutional Court, but if not, then it can be taken before the African Commission. I mean, all of these processes are not necessarily the most effective, but there are legal avenues available. I think the case that Mohamed has mentioned is sort of incidental to the Khartoum process. These are the bilateral agreements. That is the most direct challenge you can take, because they are where states actually send people back to the countries in the region. That can be challenged as a violation of their human rights and obligations under the Refugee Convention.
But the concern is that the legal system in Sudan is already being tested in so many cases and proved that there's high level of corruption. So how do we trust that?
Well, yes, I just said that there might be legal avenues in Sudan, but I don't think they are considered effective. So you would have to go a level higher to the African Commission, and you would have to, because obviously that's one angle. The other angle is to challenge the European states to look at their obligations and how you can hold them responsible. But that's the legal side. I think the human rights obligations also matter at the broader sort of political challenge, to really say this is incompatible with EU human rights policy, this runs counter to good governance and so on. Because the more you can show that it results in violations, and there have been several incidents, the more it discredits the process. And actually it's very interesting, in the documents on this better migration management project, they have a risk assessment, and one of the issues they identified is reputational risks because of the human rights records of the countries concerned. So there is a political human rights dimension as well, and in a way that might be the more effective one of challenging the Khartoum process rather than the legal avenues, because the legal avenues are difficult and take a long time. But for both you need proper also documentation, which is the key, I think, for all these cases, because you need to link it to specific violations and which then raises concerns about the Khartoum process as a whole.
Thank you for your contribution. In spite of the fact that you said there are no enough information about this, but the presence of Khartoum process, if you can't have information, how could we be more than theoretical? I read, I think two years ago, I read a report about this thing, and there are things about camps in Libya. And the study, the report mentioned many things about, the restriction, and it's like prisons. So my question is, where are the camps, or, the materialistic, presence of the whole thing? Where are the camps in Sudan or in Libya, or where, and what type of life, refugee collected? And
Yes.
Thank you for the open themes for this, very important speech about a very important and hot issue. And I congratulate you for choosing very talented scholars to talk and raise our awareness about this issue. It seems to me it's very difficult wherever you approach this process. You find so many difficulties and you find challenges from the start to the end. And a lot of things need to be demystified, so that we can really know how we can, contribute to it, or how can tackle these issues. One of the things, the very thinking of it is political, which is, how to keep the immigrants away from coming to Europe. And this is one of the things that's, instead of, contributing to the solution, it becomes difficulty in itself. And that is why, chosen, the regime or the Khartoum government, as a stakeholder in this process, and contribute to the success of this process, if there is any success anyway. The other things is, it seems that human rights organizations and the United Nations organizations are not involved, or at least I haven't heard the speakers talk about their role in this process. So the conflict of interest, even between the European countries themselves, make it even more difficult. And the conflict between them and between the countries that they call them in the terminology source of the migration. Are they source or are they cause of the immigration, or producers of immigration? Whichever, whether Moroccan process or they cause this immigration. And they have interests which are different from the European interests. Even the systems, administration system in the two parties, they are totally different. How to reconcile between these, conflicting interests in the process. So it creates more questions, really, and it's, I think that's why it is a very interesting issue. The recognition of your contribution to this, is it recognized? Is there any way that we can say, look, this is going to be the better way, is to look at this aspect of it rather than the other aspect? Is that acceptable by the European Union or by the other governments? So these are the issues that we need really, if you can elaborate on them, will be good.
Thank you. One more? Okay, we'll answer these two questions. I think it's detailed enough.
Shall I start? Okay. Change the order for once. Okay, first one. Question of the lack of information. I think there are two levels. One is the lack of information about the Khartoum process itself, because there was limited information about actually the meetings that had taken place and sort of the political dynamics behind the process. And the other one is about what is happening on the ground. So I think both of that is very important. In terms of what is happening on the ground, I think that, there is a lot of information available on that as well, because what researchers have done is usually speak with refugees and migrants about their experience. So a lot of that is known. I mean, you have a major camp in the east of Sudan, but I mean, obviously refugees are not only, migrants are not only based in camps. I mean, they are spread throughout Sudan, and apparently the migration routes have also changed, going much more through Khartoum now rather than the east, because the east is considered to be too risky. So I think there is information available, and there is more research that is being done on that now, because there is interest in the Khartoum process, and I know of at least a couple of projects, and I'm sure there are many more, that are now being funded by various governments and others looking at the realities on the ground. So I think that is as the policy and implementation of the project progresses, you will also have much more information about the actual impact on the ground. And it's going to be interesting to see how that feeds back and influences development. So I think that is happening. Now, one of the other issues raised is that the ultimate driver is migration control. And the first round of question was also the issue. I think you have to acknowledge the reality that it is become a policy priority for Western governments. So that is just a reality. So I think whoever challenges the Khartoum process has to deal with that. And obviously even the combat against trafficking is in and of itself seen as a legitimate policy goal. So to say the whole Khartoum process is bad, stop it immediately, I don't think would work as a position to take. But I think that the issue is more really to acknowledge the dilemmas, but then to expose the flaws of the current model and say you need a completely different approach how you do things. And you cannot just use states in the Horn of Africa as your agents to enforce migration control without also giving something back, not only to the states but to the people in the region. Because that's the problem, it's interstate, it's nothing is given back to the people in the region, and that dimension is completely absent so far. And I think that would be a strong shift in the dynamics if you make it more people-centered and say you need to look at the interests of the people. That should be your prime consideration. So it's not only your voters here and your ministries of interior that should have the prime say, but it's also people in the region. So I think that's a broader discourse where it can be challenged. And I think one of the problems you have there is, of course, that the EU policy is one-dimensional. I mean, because it's not only Horn of Africa, it's with Syria as well, it's with a lot of other countries. The problem is that the EU has not done its fair share of what is called burden or responsibility sharing. Because the bulk of refugees and forced migrants, they don't live in Europe, they are kept, say, in the Middle East or now in the Horn of Africa. And that is not a very sustainable position. But I mean, if you listen to Theresa May and others in the UK government, that's how they want to frame things. They say, oh, it's much more effective to give money to governments, it costs less, and to keep people in the regions to develop it. So that is a new discourse on refugees. They even go so far to say it's unfair because only the fittest make their way to the West. What about those who are really vulnerable? And then you take in a token number of women and children sort of who are then grouped together as vulnerable, and you show that you have sort of discharged your humanitarian concerns. And I think that logic needs to be challenged. In terms of involvement of human rights organizations and what impact sort of our work has, human rights organizations, I think they have caught up. I mentioned a couple of reports that have been done, and there is a lot of focus on that now. So, and I think more will come out over time. And I think there are two issues here. Is it only the Khartoum process, or is it a much bigger issue of the nexus between migration, refugees, and human rights in the region? So, and I think the focus is certainly very well there. And how does the kind of research we're doing affect that? I think what we've done is to analyze the Khartoum process as a model and to point out all the flaws. And I think that feeds into debates that you have at various levels. You have it here at the UK inquiry, there's pressure on the UK government, there's pressure on other governments in Germany as well. So that's how it works, that the human rights organizations, journalists, others raise these, politicians raise these issues. You had a very prominent German politician who went to Sudan, raised a series of concerns. So it becomes a chorus. So different actors raise similar concerns and question the logic of that, and hopefully that will have an impact. But as I said, I think that we are facing two very different logics. We have a project executive logic, and we have what you would say is the people's logic, on the ground logic. And I think what the main challenge is to say, well, this Khartoum process, as you present it, is a parallel reality. It doesn't reflect the realities. It's an interest-driven project, and to burst that bubble, to say, your logic is flawed. Don't sell us a project which also has sort of colonial overtones, if you like, because it's sort of, you use the local governments to tame the restless natives, so to speak. So I think that is the challenge, and I think then you use human rights and all the rest of it as arguments to say that the way it's framed, the way it's done, has been done so far, it's wrong.
If I can just add to the question raised by Said Ahmed about, I think there is a lot of information related to human trafficking in the region and also in Sudan. In terms of evidence, there is a lot of cases, especially in Kassala and Gadarif. There are actually 5 special courts. In Gadarif, there are actually 2 courts in Kassala. Why actually the Human Trafficking Act applied? So there is a lot of cases, a lot of defendants who were actually sentenced, some of them to death, some of them to between 3 to 10 years imprisonment. There's also different forms of trafficking. I think now the European policy is focusing on human trafficking in terms of migration. But I think there is also other aspects of human trafficking, including child recruitment in the conflict areas, human trafficking related to domestic servants, trafficking related to slave-like practices in like gold mines. There's also forms of human trafficking related to issues of prostitution. Sexual exploitation, especially between Sudan and some of the Gulf states. Also, trafficking related to Sibag al-Hajjan, camel using children as part of the. So there are different forms of trafficking. Law enforcement agencies are actually involved in actually fighting these different cases and different aspects. So in terms of evidence, there is a lot of issues. A lot of evidence in terms of information. The problem is actually the legal system. The trafficking crimes is actually transnational, and fighting these different forms of human trafficking is actually beyond the capacity of the criminal justice system, because the nature of the crime is different from other crimes. However, human trafficking involves a lot of money, networks, which is actually ransom. Yeah, this is, and it is very difficult to dismantle the groups who are actually involved in the fight of human trafficking. So I think there is a lot of information. Also, the NCCT, the National Committee to Combat Human Trafficking, is actually part of fighting, because the committee is actually established as part of the 2014 Act. And this committee is a national committee involved in the combat of human trafficking. And actually in the paper we mentioned, we provided a quotation related to one of the members of the committee. He's actually challenging actually questioning the EU approach, and this actually brings me to your question about the challenges and difficulties with regard to the. And actually, he said that the EU wants to turn Sudan into a large prison for migrants, and that's why all of the partnerships they have built are with the police. So this actually loosely referred to the BMM project, which is actually mainly focusing on on border management. And he said, and this approach is not correct. What is correct is that there is a need to work with the police. But development and awareness raising activities are also needed. We were expecting to work with them on these activities. So he's actually a member of the committee complaining about the EU approach with regard to migration, which actually mainly focusing on border control. And I think there is a lot of challenges. For example, there is conceptual challenge with regard to migration. Migration is not a challenge for us in the whole, because Sudan, for example, is actually is a country of migrants. So there is nothing. The Europeans call it a European crisis. It's a crisis of migration. It is not a crisis in the global south. Especially one of the big flaws related to the Khartoum process is the border control, border management. And if you look at the context as the map, you cannot divide communities. Borders are very fluid borders. Tribes are actually divided between different countries. So the concept of applying the border control conception is really does not exist in the region, because there's a lot of movements between a lot of movements of migrants and communities. So it is this is, I think, one of the main and key challenges for the Khartoum process, that you cannot control the movement of people, especially where there is underdevelopment, massive displacement, armed conflict, human rights violations. So
when
I think
there is persecution, human immigration becomes a need. It's a need. I mean, they don't choose it.
Forced.
Yeah, they have to leave the country because they live in hell in their countries.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the conceptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is also the argument that the current approach is bound to fail unless you tackle it that way. And of course, what Mohamed said is, in a way, what you're doing, you're strengthening the coercive state, the repressive state. And that in itself may create further flows. It will divert them properly, but I don't think that will be the solution. I mean, the question is, of course, how you can also, we discussed that question, how can you attribute the flows of forced migrants to the Khartoum process? Can you sort of just simply compare figures and then look at the impact of the Khartoum process? Even sort of Western policymakers, I think, will find it very difficult to look at it that way. But just one more point, what Mohamed raised, I think is very important. Of course, there is a legitimate interest on the part of Sudanese authorities to combat trafficking, and I think they are also good actors in the system. So I think there is also an opportunity and an opening to work with these actors in the system. But the problem is that the Khartoum process and its logic sort of overshadows that. And I think we touched upon that, but we didn't go into too much detail. But there is a perverse element there, that the way the Khartoum process has become politicized may actually undermine those actors committed to combating trafficking the way it should be done, at a more organic grassroots level. So that is then the ultimate perversion, if you like, of the Khartoum process.
Yeah, two last questions.
Just to continue what you're saying regarding to the trafficking, that is, as far as I know from the EU state, they have framework to avoid this kind of trafficking, different type of trafficking. But in Sudan, as a developing country, did they have the legal or they practicing, or they do have a legal frame? Just to stop that things, or they have to create their own law to stop that trafficking?
Rashid?
Thank you very much, guys. I missed the first part of the thing, but I gathered the gist of it from the questions and from what you have given as an answer. It is not a question actually. To combat this type of immigration or immigrants coming through Sudan, we have to differentiate between two. There is immigrants who are actually originated from Sudan and those who use Sudan as a hub to go to Europe or to the places that they want to fence. The question is how you can maintain a situation where those people cannot go in this influx, this number of people, and go through clandestine ways to reach the shores there. I don't think the European or the West in general will be very much interested in creating development projects there to sustain the people, at least the, what you call it, the economic migrants, those who are really being pushed out, seeking a better life for themselves or their families. Because this is going to fly in the face of the ideology of the West itself, because if you do that over there, you are going to lose the market, you are going to lose another bigger picture. So they want to do this a piecemeal type of remedies here and there to safeguard their international sort of interest and creating a problem. And actually the man you quoted by using Sudan as a big prison, although Sudan, as you said, is a country of immigrants in general. I mean, the composition of the Sudanese people are coming from all over the continent and sometimes outside the continent. But the point is, how can we, the grassroots people, the organizations, human rights organizations, or the mass in general, could affect a solution that addresses these issues with the blessing and the green light sort of waving of Europe in general. I think the question is more deeper than just what we are distinguishing around the preference of it. It is bigger, so the question of solving it cannot be by this piecemeal sort of solutions.
Thank you, Rashid. I think we came to the end, but I will give them, each one will have 1 minute to answer this two questions. No, your 10 minutes already given to Lutz. That's just because we would like to organize the room and we have remaining 10 minutes, I think, after we finish here. Say, Mohamed.
Okay, the legal framework. Actually, there are multiple frameworks. There are actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, in 2014 there is a new act to combat human trafficking. There is also adoption of the Palermo Protocol, which became part of the legal framework, and also the Asylum Regulation Act 1974 was actually amended. There's a new law for refugee protection.
Within the EU.
You are talking within the EU?
No, this is within the EU. As far as I know, they have, but in developing countries as Sudan, for example, we're talking about Sudan.
I'm talking about Sudan. This also laws became part of the, actually part of the national law. And these laws were actually introduced with the support of international actors like IOM, like UNHCR. But the problem with the law is actually the implementation, because they are actually a legal framework but conflicting legal framework, because sometimes courts apply the Immigration Act. If, for example, somebody trafficked as a victim to Sudan, then the authorities will actually arrest him and try him and then deport him back. So normally the Immigration Act will apply, although they are actually victims of human trafficking. Some of them actually they apply for refugee protection or asylum, but they actually, because of the lack of legal aid, because of they are vulnerable, so they actually ended up being deported. So the legal framework is there, but the problem is actually the implementation. Now there is a lot of efforts involving part of the Khartoum process to give technical assistance to law enforcement agencies in order to be able to make a distinction between victims of trafficking or irregular migrants or those who seek refugee protection.
Thank you.
Just one final point. At the beginning, because I was just used 10 minutes, so now I need to. With actually the point mentioned by Rashid, the solution, I think this is a very big question about the solution. Because the solution is actually how you create a conducive environment in the global south, so that people will not actually migrate. This involves multiple issues like development, human rights protection, peace, rule of law, and this cannot be created overnight, I'm afraid, yeah.
Yeah, very briefly, just on the last point. I think it's very interesting because there were also African initiatives on how to deal with the issues, and a number of observers said that the European Act was sort of hijacked. Now, of course, even with African state-driven initiatives, one needs to be careful in terms of what are the ultimate interests of that. But I think there is a recognition amongst African policymakers that these are issues that they need to address. And I think part of the solution has to be to say, this is not simply a contractual thing where it's portrayed as if states in the Horn of Africa have a problem and the EU pays them to solve the problem and to keep the problem there and have it solved. I think that is a reduced logic because it is an international problem and the EU is part of the problem. You know, it's part of the international economic system, it's part of the responsibility sharing when it comes to refugees and migrants, it's part of the political relations between states. So all of that, I think, is part of that. Because as you rightly mentioned, the Horn of Africa is also Sudan, but also other countries. They're also a hub for forced migrants from all sorts of places. So I think to ignore that really means what Mohamed said, you know, to turn it into a prison and pay for the upkeep of people. And that is, to my mind, really very colonial thinking, because you want to keep the benefits, and you just pay a minuscule share to keep the order of things as you want them to be. So the question is also how sustainable that is in the long run. And you have a real, I think the EU and policymakers have a real problem at their hands if they don't acknowledge that, because people in the Horn of Africa, I don't think obviously they won't buy into it. They haven't been asked. Why should they comply? What's in it for them? The states, of course, you can see the benefits for them. I mean, for the government of Sudan, it's God-given, you know, the opportunity. But for the people, what's in it for them? You know, so I think that is a question that needs to be asked again and again. And I think maybe that's the biggest challenge you can make to the legitimacy of the process.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that people now becoming more interested and the discussion became more really enjoyable, but that's time's up. But I think we are looking forward for the paper now they're working on Lutz and Mohamed, and I hope Open Sim will share it with this. And yeah, I hope to see you again after you publish the paper, and then we can have more.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.